Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at error handling in Python. So what do you do if your program throws up an error? And sometimes you want your program to generate an error to say something's wrong. For example, if you're asking your user for a number and they give you something that isn't a number, you need there to be some kind of error. Or if you're trying to communicate over the internet, for example, to connect to a database, but you're not connected to the internet, you need to say and generate some sort of error message. So the way you throw errors or create them in Python is using assert or raise. So assert says make sure that something is true, and you just assert an expression. And if the expression is false, then it will raise an error. And so what you can do, if you don't want your program to crash if something goes wrong, or you want to give your user another chance to do something, you use try. And then if something goes wrong, except, and you deal with the exception. Else, which means that it's worked and you haven't got an exception. And then finally, which is what you do at the very end. So what we're going to do is create a function, and this function is going to be kind of an advanced input, so that when you type in your number, it has to hit a set of requirements. So we're going to define the function advanced input, and it's going to take in a message and some functions, and we're going to put a star there so that it can have any number of functions. So first we want to put everything in a while loop because we want to keep doing this until we've got an input. So we'll just put while true, and the reason is we'll never actually break this loop. When we break this loop, we'll use return, and so it will break anyway. So if we want to try something, and we'll say, so now we're going to print the message, and then we'll get an input. And we want to save this, so we'll say result is equal to the input, and in this case we want to check that everything's working. So we're going to do our functions, and we'll say for function in each of these funcs, because don't forget funcs is now a list. We want to assert the function of the result, and then when all the functions are done, that means it's passed all the tests, but obviously something could go wrong, so we need an except. So if something goes wrong, maybe we want to print please try again, and if something doesn't go wrong, then we want to return this result. And then finally, irrespective of whether it goes wrong or not, there's not really anything we want to do. So we could remove this finally, or we could put a pass and come back to it later. So now we'll test this, and we'll say that x is equal to an advanced input, and we want just a message that says input something. And so we know that funcs is going to be completely empty, so it will just ignore this step and just get the input. So now run this, and it says input something, and we'll just input test, and so it worked. So maybe at the end we should print this thing we've inputted, and so we'll print x is equal to, and then put in x. But maybe this time we also want to check that x is an integer, so I'll just put in int, and so we'll run it again, and I'll input an integer, and we see this x is equal to 15. But if I input something that's not an integer, it says please try again, input something, and so I'll put 5, and so x is equal to 5. And you might think, well, assert has said that it hasn't worked, but that's not actually what's happened. So if we actually have a look in Python, and we assert int h, which is the thing I put in, we see that it actually says the errors come from int. So if we type in just int h, it fails, so it doesn't need to use the assert. However, if we said assert h is equal to I, which obviously it's not, then it will say we've got an assertion error because because this is returned false and we wanted it to be true. So maybe we want some bounds on our value. Maybe we want it between 1 and 10. So we'll say int x is less than or equal to 10, because even though we've said int, it hasn't converted it into an integer, it's just checked that it works as an integer. And then we want x to be greater than or equal to 1. And also, because we're checking that it's an integer here, and this will fail if it's not an integer, we can delete this and say input a number between 1 and 10, and then run it. And so if we enter something that's not a number, doesn't work. If we enter a small number less than 10, doesn't work. If we enter a number more than 10, doesn't work. If we enter a number that's between 1 and 10, it works. And maybe at the end we'd want to convert this into an integer. But maybe we want to change this code a bit. So we'll have a counter, and we'll set the counter equal to 1. And then finally, irrespective of whether it succeeds or fails, we want to increment the counter. And maybe when we print the message, we want to, if the counter is not equal to 1, we want to print attempt, and then the number from the counter, so we'll format it with the counter. But maybe we also want to change the ending to a tab, so that it has the attempt number, and then a tab, and then the message, the attempt's not 1. So if we try number 50, there it says attempt 2, input a number between 1 and 10. And if we enter 0, it says attempt 3, and it's going to keep going up. So maybe this time we should just put in 6. And there we go, x is equal to 6. And so with this advanced input, we can put a message in and some functions to see what we want x to be. But maybe there are some cases where we do want x to have a certain value. So maybe here we'll put a conversion. And our conversion is also going to be a function. And we'll set it equal to a function that basically does nothing. So you put in the value x and you get out x. And I also think it would be nicer if our end was actually a new line character, because the tab doesn't look like it works that well. So when we say result is equal to input, we want to say that result is equal to the conversion function of the input. So if that was int as your conversion, it would take the input, convert it to an int, and then return the result. So here we could put back in int, and we could take out int here. So now we know that x is an integer. And so maybe at the end we could format x plus 1, whereas before that would have crashed. And so this time, if we type in a u, it's not going to work. If we type in a 20, it's not going to work. If we type in the number 15, but if we type in the number, for example 5, we see that x plus 1 is equal to 6. And I have a set of functions like this that I use all the time. I've actually added them to the Python scripts, so as well as being able to import math, I can import functions like this, because I find that having the ability to get a very specific input is really useful. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video and you'll use this code again. You've learnt a lot about errors, handling them, and we've had a look at some other advanced topics as well during this video. So if you enjoyed this video, I'll see you again. same time next week. Till then.